Festivalul de film documentar Astra împlinește 30 de ani. O bună bucată de viață de om.
Astra Film Festival, de-a lungul timpului, a trebuit să se reinventeze mereu pentru a fi relevant într-o societate care e în continuu în mișcare.
Ne îndreptăm privirea mai la est de România, parcă și poveștile vieții în general încep să aibă încărcături greu de imaginat pentru noi, mai ales în zonele cu conflict armat.
The apocalyptic scene of death and destruction left behind by Russian forces are sparking calls for a war crimes investigation as more and more atrocities come to light.
Images of bodies in shallow graves.
Probabil acest festival niciodată, sau un film, sau o experiență de interpretare a unui episod istoric în mișcare, nu au fost atât de tulburător de confruntate cu ceva ce nu știm cum evoluează.
I very much wanted people not in Ukraine to see the film first. I wanted people whose lives are affected and who are close to Ukraine.
I think it was a very important statement of the Ukrainian people to say that I am here, we are here. And I think not just the Ukrainian people, but the people all over the world who are now staring down authoritarian regimes. To understand the significance of the statement, we are here. Together we can be this.
Tocmai am asistat la un masterclass extraordinar în care am aflat multe lucruri faine. Cum a fost pentru tine întâlnirea asta cu André Singer?
A fost o întâlnire foarte bună. De mult am vrut să-l invit pe André Singer la Sibiu. Este o serie pe care am creat-o acum câțiva ani, în care aduc cei mai celebri documentariști, realizatori de filme documentare din lume, și Andrei este unul dintre ei. Anul trecut a fost Nick Broomfield, care a creat un stil întreg în documentar, și Andrei este foarte influential, nu știu cum să zic, a avut o mare influență, dar într-un fel diferit decât Nick Broomfield. Andrei a lucrat ca regizor, ca producător executiv, ca și commissioning editor, ca și redactor, și a făcut pentru televiziune și pentru cinema sute de documentare efectiv cu cei mai celebri documentariști din lume, cu Jean Rouch, cu Penny Baker, cu Fred Weissman. A lucrat cu foarte multă lume. Și cel mai important este Werner Herzog, cu care a colaborat de 3 decenii. Au făcut împreună 17 sau 18 filme. Unul dintre ele a fost prezentat și aici acum câțiva ani, Meeting Gorbachev. Festivalul ediția de anul ăsta s-a deschis cu Meeting Zelensky, pe care Andrei l-a coregizat cu un actor celebru din Hollywood. Și înaintea discuției mele cu Andrei a fost un film despre Werner Herzog, un film foarte, foarte bun, care ne dă cumva o idee despre teritoriul Werner Herzog. E un întreg teritoriu. Werner Herzog este o planetă în sine, o țară în sine, nu știu cum să o descriu asta, a country in itself.
Și mi-a plăcut foarte mult să văd și cum s-au filmat multe lucruri și ce conflicte erau cu actorii și cât de mult umor are Herzog până la urmă.
Da, este un regizor extraordinar și lansează în curând autobiografia și Andrei a lucrat cu el foarte aproape și cred că în seara asta ați aflat lucruri care sunt interesante despre colaborarea lor.
That's me. That's my landscape.
He has searched every corner of the world and collected some of the most rapturous dreams.
Werner's work makes things possible that would not otherwise be possible.
There's something about him that is so hypnotic.
Moving a ship across a mountain. What? That's fresh. That's Werner Herzog.
Stones are raining from the sky. They tumble.
Wer hat das schon geschafft, dass er seinen ureigenen Akzent erfunden hat, den die Welt dann auch mag und nachmacht und komisch findet?
Well, I believe that he could eat his shoe.
That sounds like it probably is true. Is it true?
Inszeniert das Event, alle Leute auf das Floß und dann runter den Fluss. Let's see what happens.
It was life. You know, it's like you bit into like an exquisitely sour and sweet fruit that you never tasted before.
That's it.
There was one difficulty after the other. Lack of money, technical problems. We had 2 plane crashes.
I live my life or I end my life with this project.
My existence has a meaning when I'm trying to do a story where I know it is deep inside all of us. I just try to remain a good soldier. I mean, a good soldier of cinema.
Where is the source of that?
I don't want to know where it comes from.
Which are the challenges nowadays for documentaries? You speak about AA and different type of storytelling and shorter way of storytelling.
Well, I think the documentary has always survived and will always survive, because documentary filmmaking is just a way of telling stories that the filmmaker believes are true and putting them across to an audience. So I'm not worried about whether documentaries will survive, but what happens over time, and what has happened more now than ever before, is the ways those stories are being put across to an audience. That's changed. So I have gone through several decades of using television as the main way of putting documentaries across. So I work for BBC, Channel 4, American television, European television. And there's a sort of a format that those films take, which is usually half an hour or 1 hour, or sometimes, if you're lucky enough to do a long form, which can be a 90-minute film. And that's lasted ever since I started back in the 1970s to today, the ability to make those kinds of length of films. But suddenly now, for the first time, younger audiences in particular are not watching 1 hour films anymore, or 90-minute films. They can sometimes see those in the cinema or on special occasions or at festivals like this, but generally that 90-minute format and the 1 hour format, it's not dead. All of our televisions still want them, but the audience is declining, and it's quite clear it's declining. The statistics that I've recently have come out of America have shown that traditional viewing is now declined in terms of those 1 hour films. And that's mainly because young people like watching on their phones or on their iPads or on other formats, and they watch in small bites. So they watch YouTube or they watch other forms, TikTok, so on. So that's something that I think documentary filmmakers have to be aware of, and I think it's come across very quickly on us. You know, I think if you'd asked me this question 2 years ago, I wouldn't have thought of it as serious as I do this year. And part of that is because I have had conversations with quite senior executives who are trying to find ways that they can combine the short form and encourage their audiences to watch both. So the short form is almost like an advert or a promotion. You watch the short form, hey, that's interesting. We play a game around that subject, that's interesting. When the main films are made, okay, I'd now like to watch it because I get more detail and more influence. So I have no idea, I really have no idea where it's going to go. But I do think it's a very serious challenge now for documentary filmmakers. They've got to find different ways to attract that audience and keep a younger audience going. Otherwise, it's going to slowly decrease in that direction.
You mentioned, and I think it's very important, about respect and understanding on community you're filming on.
I think we would call ourselves documentary filmmakers simply because we're trying to put across what we see as the truth about the people we're looking at. My background is in anthropology, so I have, for a lot of my career, a lot of my past, I've looked at communities outside my own society. So I come from London, so I tend not to make films about the UK or London. I make films about different societies around the world that interest me or interest my broadcasters, that I can put across. Now, if you have the responsibility of portraying another community, another society with different sets of values, different religions, different social mores and ways of living, then you've got to be hypersensitive to portray them correctly. And that's a challenge. That's a real challenge for the filmmaker. And so many times you see films where that respect given them is not in the film. That you're upsetting that society, and I don't think you have real grounds. They let you into their hearts and their communities only because they believe that you're telling something that they also want other people to hear about. Otherwise, you're exploiting them. So I think that question that you have about respect should be almost number one. If you're going to go somewhere else, you know from day one that you should not be exploiting those people unless you're trying to do a current affairs program, for example, or expose criminality or expose wrongdoing. Then, of course, that's a very different thing. But that's not the kind of films I make. I make films that enhance their society, and they want other people to understand them. And that's where your respect question comes in.
What are you trying to find through this film, to this documentary? It's about you, about world?
We're all curious individuals, and I think if a subject, and they're very different subjects that I've been filming about, I think if the subject matter interests me and I'm curious, and if the people I want to film appreciate that their story is worth telling outside, then that's something that I will chase and I will do. I've never quite had the luxury of saying, I want to make a film about this, so I'm going to go and make it. Usually there are other constraints. You know, you're working for a broadcaster, they want a different kind of film. You're working for a financial group that they want to put money behind a film, they want something else. My job tend to be the person that people come to with the films and say, this is an idea, do you think we can put this together as a film? And then I look at it and I think it's worth doing. I try and help find the finance, put the package together and make the film, or help them make the film. Occasionally I make them myself, but usually I'm helping other people make films. And that is therefore not my choice. I don't sit at home and say, I really want to make a film, about China, because I'm fascinated by China. Let's see if I can put the money together. It doesn't work that way for me. Somebody might come to me with a film about China, and then I'll say, that's a fantastic idea. I'll see if I can persuade number 1, 2, 3, and 4 to put the money out, which is what I did a few years ago about a Chinese film about a really tragic story of a young man who wants to become a woman, and in Chinese society that's forbidden, and the Chinese filmmaker had been following this person for a long time, and it was a beautiful film he had, film material, and I said, that's great film, I'll help you put it together, and we then found the money and made a film. So it's that kind of process for me.
You told us that you were corrupted by Herzog. How was this relationship for you?
I think when I say corrupted by Herzog, that's perhaps unfair on Werner. It's because corruption has a negative context. So I've been influenced, shall we say, is probably a better word to use. It's that I think I came from a background where people felt documentary should be telling the truth through the camera, and they believed that one of the styles of telling the truth is what they call observational filmmaking. So you point the camera and the camera doesn't tell a lie and you follow that. Of course, that's not really the case, because what you point the camera at is selective, what you don't point the camera at is also editing, and so on. Werner, when I started working with Werner, and that's 35 years ago now, he made films not about what the camera points at, but what he has basically in his heart and his mind. He has a story he wants to tell, and he looks for the way of telling that story. And he will then point the camera at what he thinks is the right material for that. And sometimes it's not observational. He uses material in different ways, I think, to a lot of filmmakers. And he has structured a word that he calls ecstatic truth. So it's not truth as we might know it from the dictionary. It's his truth in his heart, what he wants to tell. And gradually, I think I was very nervous of this in my early film days, but gradually I've realized that there's a lot of, there's a positive side to that, that if your audience knows you're doing that, then there's nothing wrong with doing it. If you're fooling your audience, then it's part of that whole movement now about false truth and so on. But I don't think Werner does that. Werner doesn't. He knows his audience knows that his material is not the truth in objective sense, but it's what he believes is the truth in the overall story. So I think that's interesting, and I've gradually moved more in his direction than I thought I would.
We are here at the Festival of Documentaries. Which is the importance of documentaries and festival about them?
I think it's not only important, it's actually critical now going forward, because that is where, number one, it's a method where people can show their films and try and find outlets for it outside the festival world, but it gives them a place to show it. And often there's nowhere else they can show it. And I find a lot of films actually only have a festival circuit. They get shown around different festivals around the world. And in the end, they get very good audiences by doing that, but they won't necessarily get a television outlet. And I think going back to the idea that things are changing in the world of documentaries in any case, I think the festivals are going to be more important as a platform for filmmakers to put their films out and get some audience, and then they may have to change their films as a result. They may get different reactions. It's a test case for films. The film I showed here about Zelensky isn't a finished film. When I go back, I'll be taking soundings and seeing what people have thought of it and whether I'm missing things and so on. And using festivals as your sounding base, and more distributors now going to festivals to look for films, find films. I think that's growing in importance.
What would you tell to the young filmmakers in documentaries? Tips and tricks and some reason to not quit.
I would say become an accountant or a lawyer. And if you can't become an accountant or lawyer and you still want to be a filmmaker, I think I would, again, agree with Werner Herzog, which is you follow your heart and you find your way of making your film. And the wonderful thing, I think, for students today, that I think was very different in my day, is that there are ways you can make films now that are cost-effective, different. I was talking a little earlier about new methods of putting imagery together, that you don't necessarily have to now go to China to make a film about China. You can do it in different search engines that you can find on the internet. There's this thing called Unreal Engine and things like that. And that's actually exciting for students. I think it's actually a good time for students to be, even though the broadcast world is hard, it's good for students because they've got outlets that they can test. They've got YouTube. They can do short films to see if they're capable of working with imagery. So I think it's a very encouraging time for students. I think it's a good time for them.
Sunt foarte importante aceste întâlniri cu maestri, pentru că, deși lucrează de mulți ani, sunt tot timpul la zi cu noutățile și vorbesc despre felul în care inteligența artificială și noile tehnologii și noul fel în care se ascultă poveștile ne vor influența pe viitor.
Sunt oameni care sunt la curent cu ce se întâmplă, care discută lucruri care sunt, nu știu, esențiale în momentul ăsta despre cum se consumă televiziunea, cum se consumă documentarul. Pentru mine un festival de film documentar, un festival bun de film documentar este un loc al întâlnirilor publicului cu filmele, al întâlnirilor publicului cu realizatorii de filme, a întâlnirilor dintre realizatorii de filme, al întâlnirilor cu idei noi, cu concepte noi, cu moduri noi de a aborda lumea. Și cred că în ultimele 30 de ediții, pentru că Sibiu, Astra Film aniversează cea 30-a ediție, Astra Film a devenit un loc adevărat al întâlnirilor. Aici poți să te întâlnești cu toate lucrurile astea pe care le-am menționat și e ceva efervescent în discuțiile care se întâmplă aici, în filmele pe care poți să le vezi aici.
Quería hacer una película.
My love of documentary is because I love real things, and I think that real life is so much more surprising and interesting.
Take some parts of the reality and place them to the screen so they can live longer than they do, because the moments are so fragile.
The big force of documentary is to show all kinds of stories all over the world in many different forms.
Det her er min fars hjemmevideo. Han har lige købt et kamera, så han filmer bare alt han ser.
Each film is a new experience, a new world.
Asta face Astra Film Fest esențial. Arată câte lumi paralele coexistă pe pământ și ne învață să încercăm cel puțin să construim poduri între ele.
Descoperim prin filme noi destine, drame, peisaje, fenomene ale lumii contemporane. Experiența festivalului ne transformă.
I live my life, I end my life with this project.